The letter trembled in Willa Harper's hands, the cruel words blurring as tears threatened to spill onto the carefully penned script. Disgrace to the family name, they had called her. She folded the paper quickly as the stagecoach hit another rut in the dusty road, jostling her against the wooden interior. Colorado Territory, 1876, a fresh start, they had promised in the advertisement. A place where no one knew her name or the scandal that followed it like a shadow. "Last stop, Silvercliff," the driver called, his voice carrying over the drumming of hooves. "End of the line, folks." Willa tucked the letter into her reticule, straightened her worn but dignified traveling dress, and braced herself for whatever awaited her in this frontier town. Her late husband's family had made it abundantly clear that there was nothing left for her in Boston, not after what they called her failure as a wife. 11 months of marriage, ended by Thomas's sudden death from fever and no child to show for it. "Barren," her mother-in-law had hissed at the funeral. "A disgrace." Silvercliff emerged from the landscape like an afterthought, a scattering of wooden buildings stretched along a wide main street, backed by towering mountains that caught the afternoon sun. Willa stepped down from the stagecoach, her legs unsteady after 2 days of travel. Dust immediately coated her boots and the hem of her dress. "Madam, you need help with your trunks." The driver was already unloading her 2 modest cases. "Thank you, I can manage," she replied, reaching for her smaller valise. "Suit yourself." He tipped his hat before climbing back up to his perch. "Hotel's down that way if you're looking," Willa nodded, gathering her courage along with her belongings. The schoolhouse was supposed to be at the far end of town, with teachers' quarters attached. That would be her new home, her sanctuary if everything went according to plan. She had taken no more than 10 steps when the sound of pounding hooves and shouting voices froze her in place. A loose horse came thundering down the main street, saddle empty, reins flying. Behind it, a man on horseback pursued at breakneck speed, his hat lost to the wind. "Clear the way," someone shouted, but Willa stood transfixed, her trunks anchoring her to the spot. The loose horse veered suddenly toward her. Time slowed as Willa saw the wild fear in its eyes, the foam at its mouth. Then something solid struck her from the side, sending her sprawling into the dirt as the horse thundered past, missing her by inches. "Are you all right, madam?" The voice belonged to a man now crouched beside her, his expression a mix of concern and apology. His eyes were the precise color of the summer sky, set in a sun-weathered face framed by dark blonde hair that fell in unruly waves. "I believe so," Willa managed, trying to regain her composure as he helped her to her feet. Her dress was covered in dust, and she felt a stinging scrape on her palm. "Damn fool riding too hard into town spooked that mare," the man explained, brushing dust from his own clothes. "I'm mighty sorry about knocking you down, but that horse would have done worse." "Then I thank you for your quick thinking, Mr. Dawson, Daniel Dawson." He retrieved her fallen reticule, handing it to her with a small nod. "Most folks just call me Dan." "Willa Harper," she replied, accepting the bag. "I've just arrived to take the teaching position." A smile transformed his face, warming his features. "The school teacher? Well now, that's something the whole town's been waiting on. Children running wild as jackrabbits without proper learning." Willa couldn't help but notice his attire, practical riding clothes, worn leather vest, and a holster at his hip. A cowboy, perhaps, or a rancher. Certainly not the sort of man she would have associated with in Boston. "If you're headed to the schoolhouse, Miss Harper, I'd be happy to escort you." "It's not far, but those trunks look heavy for a lady." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, "Mrs. Harper, and I wouldn't want to impose, no imposition at all." He picked up both trunks with ease. "I was heading that direction anyway. My ranch supplies most of the town with beef, so I make deliveries to the boarding houses regular-like." As they walked, Willa felt the stares of townsfolk following their progress. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but walking alongside one of the local men immediately after arrival would certainly start tongues wagging. Still, she couldn't deny the practical need for assistance. "You're from back east, I reckon," Dan said, breaking the silence. Not many folks come all the way out here unless they're running to something or from something. The observation struck too close to home. I'm simply seeking employment, Mr. Dawson. The advertisement specified a need for a qualified teacher. He nodded, not pressing further. Well, we sure do need one. 28 children of schooling age in Silvercliff, and not one of them can cipher proper. Last teacher left 6 months ago couldn't handle the winters. The schoolhouse appeared ahead, a simple wooden structure with a small bell tower. Attached to one side was a modest dwelling that would serve as her quarters. Here we are, Dan announced, setting down her trunks at the doorstep. He produced a key from his pocket. Mayor asked me to hold on to this till you arrived. Town council's been maintaining the place, but it might need a woman's touch. The phrase made Willa stiffen slightly. How many times had her mother-in-law critiqued her homemaking skills? I'm sure it will be perfectly adequate. The interior was spare but clean, a single room with a cast iron stove, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small bookshelf. Through another door she could see the schoolroom itself, rows of desks facing a larger desk and a blackboard. It's not much, Dan said, watching her face carefully. But it's solid built, no leaks in the roof, and the stove works well enough. It's more than adequate, Willa replied, genuinely pleased with the space after fearing much worse. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Dawson. He lingered in the doorway, hat in hands. Mayor Thompson will likely come by tomorrow to welcome you proper. School term doesn't start for another week, so you've got time to settle in. He paused. Town socials happening Saturday night at the meeting hall. Good way to meet folks if you're inclined, Willa hesitated. Social gatherings had been torture in Boston after Thomas's death, the pitying looks, the whispered comments. I'll consider it, she said finally. Thank you again for your help today. My pleasure, Mrs. Harper. He placed his hat back on his head, tipping it slightly. If you need anything at all, my ranch is just 3 miles north. Anyone can point the way. After he left, Willa sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to breathe. The letter from her in-laws seemed to burn inside her reticule, a reminder of all she had fled. A disgrace, they had called her, unmarriageable at 23, unable to provide an heir, unsuited to proper society. She rose determinedly and began unpacking her belongings. This small room would become her haven, this town her new beginning. No one here knew of her past failures. No one would judge her by Boston standards. As she placed her few books on the shelf, Willa caught herself thinking of Daniel Dawson's kind eyes. He had called her madam with genuine respect, had helped her without expectation. A different sort of man than she was accustomed to, straightforward, perhaps rough around the edges, but there had been something reassuring about his presence. The following days passed in a blur of preparations. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with an impressive mustache, had indeed welcomed her officially, providing her with a list of students and the town's expectations. The general store owner extended credit until her first month's salary. Several mothers stopped by with preserved fruits and fresh bread, curious about the new teacher but polite in their inquiries. No one asked why she had come alone or why a young widow would choose such a remote posting. For that small mercy, Willa was grateful. By Saturday evening, she had transformed the schoolroom into a proper learning environment, organized her sparse personal quarters, and prepared lessons for the coming term. The social at the meeting hall loomed in her thoughts. Part of her wanted to hide away to avoid the inevitable scrutiny. Another part recognized the practical necessity of integration into the community. At dusk, she donned her best dress, a deep blue that had once been fashionable in Boston, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple but elegant arrangement. The walk to the meeting hall took less than 5 minutes, but with each step, Willa felt her resolve wavering. Music and laughter spilled from the building's open doors. Inside, lanterns cast a warm glow over tables laden with food, while couples danced to the lively tune of a fiddle and harmonica. Willa hovered near the entrance, immediately regretting her decision to attend. Mrs. Harper, the mayor's wife, spotted her and hurried over. How wonderful that you've joined us. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. For the next hour, Willa shook hands and exchanged pleasantries with what seemed like the entire population of Silvercliff. She met parents of future students, the town doctor, the blacksmith and his wife, the banker, and countless others whose names blurred together. Everyone was welcoming, if curious, and Willa found herself relaxing slightly as the evening progressed. She was helping herself to a cup of punch when a familiar voice spoke beside her. "Evening, Mrs. Harper. Glad to see you decided to come." Daniel Dawson looked different in his Sunday best, a clean, dark shirt, polished boots, his unruly hair tamed somewhat for the occasion. He still had that same easy smile, though, the one that reached his eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Dawson," she nodded politely. It seemed prudent to meet the community. "And how are you finding our little town so far? Everyone has been very kind," she replied truthfully. "Though I suspect the real test will come when school begins," he chuckled. "The children here aren't bad sorts, just spirited. They need a firm hand and fair mind." He gestured toward the dance floor. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Harper? Nothing too lively, just the waltz they're starting up." The invitation surprised her. In Boston, her in-laws had made it clear that a widow less than a year into her mourning should not participate in such frivolities. "I'm not certain that would be appropriate," she hedged. "Given my circumstances," understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, recent loss." When she nodded, he continued gently, "Out here we have different ways, Mrs. Harper. Life's too short and too hard to deny ourselves small joys when they present themselves. But I respect your decision, of course." Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of men had entered, clearly already deep in their cups. Their loud voices carried across the hall as they swaggered toward the refreshment table. "Trouble," Dan muttered, his posture changing subtly. "Ward Jenkins and his crew, they work the Silver Summit mine, come into town on paydays and cause grief." The miners were rough-looking men, unshaven and dusty despite the social occasion. The leader, presumably Ward Jenkins, spotted Willa and elbowed his companion, saying something that made the others laugh crudely. Dan's expression hardened. "Excuse me, Mrs. Harper. I need to have a word with the sheriff before this gets out of hand." He moved away, but not before Jenkins approached, blocking Willa's path with his considerable bulk. "Well now, you must be the new schoolmarm," he drawled, alcohol heavy on his breath. "Pretty little thing, ain't you? Too pretty to be wasting time with books and children." Willa straightened her spine. "Good evening, sir. If you'll excuse me, dance with me, teacher lady," he insisted, reaching for her arm. "Show these folks you ain't too high and mighty for the likes of us working men." "The lady declined to dance with me, Jenkins." Dan's voice cut in as he reappeared at Willa's side. "So I doubt she'd accept one from you in your current state." Jenkins's face darkened. "Stay out of this, Dawson, ain't your business. Mrs. Harper is our town's new teacher," Dan replied evenly. "Making her feel welcome is everyone's business. Now, why don't you and your boys head over to the food table? Mrs. Thornton's apple pie might improve your disposition." For a tense moment, Willa thought Jenkins might throw a punch. Instead, he spat on the floor near Dan's boots. "Always playing the gentleman, ain't you, Dawson? Even for some prissy widow who thinks she's better than the rest of us." "That's enough," came another voice. The sheriff, a grizzled man Willa had met earlier, stepped forward. "Take your boys outside to cool off, Ward. You can come back when you remember your manners." With a final glare at Dan, Jenkins stalked away, his companions following reluctantly. "I apologize for that unpleasantness," Dan said once they were gone. "Jenkins is all bluster when he drinks. He'll be contrite tomorrow." Willa realized she was trembling slightly. "Thank you for intervening. I'm afraid I'm not accustomed to such directness. No one should have to be." His gaze was steady, concerned. "Would you like me to walk you home? No one would think less of you for leaving early." The consideration in his offer touched her more than she expected. "Actually, Mr. Dawson, I believe I would like that dance now if the offer still stands." Surprise and pleasure flashed across his features. "It does indeed, Mrs. Harper." He led her to the dance floor as the musicians began a gentle waltz. When his hand settled respectfully at her waist, Willa felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. How long had it been since she danced? Her brief marriage to Thomas had consisted mainly of formal dinners and polite conversation, rarely anything as intimate as dancing. "You dance well," she observed as he guided her smoothly through the steps. "My mother insisted all her boys learn," he replied with a smile. Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn colt. "How many brothers do you have?" "Had 3, lost one in the war, one to typhoid. My youngest brother helps run the ranch with me." The sorrow in his voice was old but still present. "What about you?" "Any family out east missing you?" Willa hesitated. "No immediate family. My parents passed years ago, my husband's family." She trailed off, unsure how to explain without revealing too much. "Not supportive of your decision to come west," he guessed. "They made it clear I was no longer welcome in their household after Thomas died," she said carefully. "We had different views on my future," understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, wanted you to remarry quick, did they? That's often the way with proper Eastern families. A young widow is a burden unless she can be passed along to another suitable match." "Something like that," Willa acknowledged, surprised by his perception. The music carried them through another turn, and she found herself relaxing into the rhythm, into the steady presence of her partner. "Well, their loss is Silvercliff's gain," Dan said simply. "Takes courage to leave everything familiar behind and start fresh. That's something folks out here understand and respect. Courage, not a word her in-laws would ever have associated with her." Willa Harper, who had been too afraid to contradict her husband even when she disagreed, who had accepted her mother-in-law's constant criticism without protest, who had endured whispers about her childless state with downcast eyes. Yet here was this man, this stranger, calling her brave for the very actions her in-laws had condemned as foolish and desperate. The dance ended too soon. Dan escorted her back to the refreshment table, where several of the town matrons immediately engaged her in conversation. He tipped his hat in farewell, needed elsewhere, but his words lingered with Willa long after he'd gone. Brave. Perhaps here in this dusty frontier town, she could finally become the woman she had never dared to be in Boston. The first day of school arrived with cloudless skies and nervous anticipation. 23 children of varying ages filed into the schoolroom, eyeing their new teacher with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Willa stood before them in her most practical dress, hair neatly pinned, determined to make a good impression. "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am Mrs. Harper, and I will be your teacher. In this room, we will learn reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography. But more importantly, we will learn respect for knowledge, for each other, and for ourselves." A freckle-faced boy in the back row raised his hand. "Mrs. Harper, my pa says Eastern education ain't worth spit out here where knowing how to track game and predict weather matters more." Several children giggled. Willa maintained her composure. "And your name is?" "Samuel Tucker, madam." "Well, Mr. Tucker, please inform your father that while those practical skills are indeed valuable, being able to read a contract might prevent him from being cheated in business. Mathematics might help him calculate fair wages or accurate measurements for building, and history might teach him which mistakes others have made so he need not repeat them." She smiled. "Now, shall we begin?" By midday, Willa had assessed the general education level of her students widely varied, identified potential troublemakers, Samuel Tucker and his 2 cousins, and discovered several eager minds hungry for knowledge. She dismissed them for lunch with a sense of cautious optimism. As the children scattered, Willa noticed a horse and rider approaching the schoolhouse. Even at a distance, she recognized Daniel Dawson's broad shoulders and easy posture in the saddle. Her heart performed an unexpected little skip that she firmly attributed to surprise. "Mrs. Harper," he called, dismounting and removing his hat. "Hope I'm not interrupting your teaching day." "We're on our lunch break," she replied, stepping onto the small porch. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Dawson?" He produced a small crate from his saddlebag. "Brought you some apples from my orchard. Thought they might be useful for teaching counting, sharing, rewarding good behavior, or just eating if you prefer." The thoughtful gesture touched her deeply. "That's very kind. The children will be delighted." How's the first day treating you?" he asked, setting the crate down. "Better than I feared, though I suspect Samuel Tucker may prove challenging," Dan chuckled. "Ah, young Sam, smart as a whip but stubborn as his father, shows off for the others." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Ask him to help with the younger ones. He's got 3 little sisters at home, knows how to be patient when it counts." Willa filed the advice away gratefully. "I'll try that approach. Also," he continued, "wanted to invite you to Sunday dinner at my ranch. My brother Wyatt and I take turns hosting the preacher after services, and a few folks usually join us. Thought you might enjoy getting out of town for a spell." The invitation was unexpected. "That's very thoughtful, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, loves having company to appreciate her cooking." His smile was warm, genuine. "Besides, our local pastor is quite educated, studied back east before coming west for his health. Thought you might enjoy conversation with someone familiar with your background." Put that way, the invitation was hard to refuse. "Then I accept with gratitude." The children were beginning to return, eyeing Dan curiously. He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll collect you after church on Sunday if that suits, around noon." "That would be fine." "Thank you for the apples, Mr. Dawson." He mounted his horse with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Good luck with young Tucker, Mrs. Harper. Remember what I said, give him responsibility, not just discipline." As he rode away, Willa became aware of the speculative looks from her returning students. A visit from Daniel Dawson, apparently, was noteworthy enough to inspire whispers. "Is Mr. Dawson sweet on you, Mrs. Harper?" asked a bold girl of about 12. "Mr. Dawson was simply delivering apples for the school," Willa replied firmly. "Now, let's continue with our lessons." The remainder of the week passed quickly as Willa established routines and expectations with her students. Dan's suggestion about Samuel Tucker proved remarkably effective when tasked with helping the youngest children with their letters. The boys' entire demeanor changed from disruptive to protective. By Sunday, Willa had settled into the rhythm of her new life. Church services were held in the same meeting hall where the social had taken place, temporarily converted with rows of benches. Reverend Phillips delivered a thoughtful sermon on new beginnings that seemed particularly apt for Willa's circumstances. After the service, as promised, Dan was waiting with a smart buggy. "Mrs. Harper," he greeted her, offering his hand to help her up. "You look lovely today." She wore her Sunday best, a forest green dress with modest trim that had once been considered elegant in Boston. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." The ride to his ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, backdropped by the magnificent mountains. Dan pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, including his own arrival 12 years earlier as a young man seeking his fortune. "Bought the land for almost nothing," he explained. "It was considered too dry for farming but perfect for cattle. Started with just 20 head and built from there." The Dawson Ranch came into view, a substantial log home with several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Well-maintained and prosperous looking without being ostentatious. Several ranch hands tipped their hats as Dan drove the buggy to the house. "Welcome to Clearwater Ranch," he said as he helped her down, "named for the spring that feeds our property year-round." Inside, the home was surprisingly comfortable, solid furniture, clean surfaces, and touches of refinement Willa hadn't expected. Framed sketches of landscapes adorned the walls, colorful woven rugs covered portions of the wooden floors, and bookshelves held an impressive collection of volumes. "Your home is lovely," she said sincerely. "Most of the credit goes to Mrs. Abernathy," Dan replied. "She's kept house for us since my mother passed and has strong opinions about how a proper home should look." As if summoned, a sturdy woman in her 50s emerged from what Willa presumed was the kitchen. "About time you got back, Daniel. Reverend Phillips arrived 10 minutes ago, and your brother's been making him listen to that interminable story about the bear again. Mrs. Abernathy, may I present Mrs. Willa Harper, our new school teacher. Mrs. Harper, this is Mrs. Abernathy, the true authority at Clearwater Ranch." The housekeeper assessed Willa with shrewd eyes before offering a smile. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Harper. About time we had a proper teacher again." "These children are running wild as jackrabbits, so I've been told," Willa replied with a smile of her own, "though I'm finding them quite teachable." "Come through to the dining room," Mrs. Abernathy instructed. "Everything's ready, and if we wait any longer, that brother of his will have talked the poor reverend's ear clean off." The dining room held a long table already set for the meal. Reverend Phillips, a thin man with kind eyes, stood as they entered, as did a younger man who bore a strong resemblance to Dan. "Mrs. Harper, you've met Reverend Phillips," Dan said, "and this is my brother Wyatt." "Madam," Wyatt greeted her with a nod. Though similar to Dan in build and coloring, he lacked his brother's easy confidence. "Welcome to Clearwater." The meal that followed was delicious roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables, and homemade bread. The conversation flowed naturally, with Reverend Phillips indeed proving to be well educated and thoughtful. He had attended seminary in New York before tuberculosis had sent him seeking the dry Colorado air. "And how are you finding our little community, Mrs. Harper?" he asked as Mrs. Abernathy served apple pie for dessert. "Everyone has been very welcoming," Willa replied. "The children are eager to learn once properly motivated." "She's already got Sam Tucker in line," Dan added with obvious admiration. "Had him helping the little ones instead of disrupting class." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "That's a feat. Old man Tucker himself can't control that boy." "Mrs. Harper understands something many miss," Reverend Phillips observed. "Children, like adults, need purpose and recognition more than discipline." The conversation shifted to local matters: the upcoming Harvest Festival, concerns about water rights, a dispute between neighboring ranchers. Willa found herself genuinely enjoying the company and the sense of community it represented. After the meal, Dan suggested a short tour of the property. "If you're interested in seeing a working ranch," he added, "no obligation." "I would like that very much," Willa replied, truthfully curious about his way of life. They walked first to the corral, where several horses watched their approach with interest. Dan produced an apple from his pocket, offering it to a sleek chestnut mare who approached eagerly. "This is Penny," he said as the horse delicately took the treat. "Best cutting horse I've ever owned, smart as they come." "She's beautiful," Willa observed, tentatively reaching out to stroke the mare's neck. "She likes you," Dan noted with approval. "Penny's particular about people." They continued to the barn, where Dan showed her the tack room, explained the seasonal rhythm of ranch work, and introduced her to a litter of kittens born to the barn cat 2 weeks earlier. "They'll earn their keep as mousers once they're grown," he explained as Willa gently petted a tiny orange tabby. "But for now, they're just trouble on 4 paws." Throughout the tour, Willa found herself increasingly comfortable in Dan's company. He explained things clearly without condescension, answered her questions thoughtfully, and seemed genuinely pleased by her interest. As they walked back toward the house, Dan hesitated. "Mrs. Harper, Willa, if I may, you may," she responded, surprising herself with the permission. "I've enjoyed your company these past weeks," he continued, "and I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it." The directness of his request caught her off guard. In Boston, courtship was a delicate dance of hints and subtle maneuvers, families negotiating behind the scenes. "Mr. Dawson, Dan, please." "Dan," she amended. "I'm not certain that would be wise. I've only just arrived in Silvercliff, and my position as teacher requires a certain propriety." "I understand that," he acknowledged, "and I respect it, but out here we tend to speak plainly. I admire you, Willa. Your courage in coming west alone, your dedication to teaching our children, your dignity in the face of challenges like Jenkins at the social." He met her eyes directly. "I'd like the chance to know you better and for you to know me." Nothing improper, just occasional rides, perhaps dinner, conversation. Willa considered his words. There was no denying the attraction she felt toward him, the ease in his company. But memories of her failed marriage lingered: the disappointment, the criticism, the growing sense of inadequacy. "I need time," she said finally. My previous marriage was not what I had hoped for. I'm not eager to repeat the experience. Understanding softened his features. I'm not asking for marriage, Willa, just the opportunity for friendship that might grow into something more should we both wish it. He smiled slightly. I'm a patient man. Relief mingled with an unexpected disappointment at his easy acceptance. Then yes, I would welcome your calls, provided they don't interfere with my teaching duties or cause gossip that might undermine my position. I'll be discretion itself, he promised, his smile broadening. Starting with returning you to town before sunset to avoid wagging tongues. True to his word, Dan had Willa back in Silvercliff well before dusk. As he helped her down from the buggy in front of her quarters, he held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you for joining us today, he said. Next Sunday, perhaps you'd like to see the waterfall up in Wilson's Canyon. It's about an hour's ride, but worth the journey. That sounds lovely, she replied, finding she meant it. Good evening, Dan. Good evening, Willa. As autumn settled over Colorado, Willa found herself settling into a new rhythm of life. Weekdays were devoted to her students, who were progressing better than she had dared hope. Evenings were spent preparing lessons, reading, or occasionally accepting dinner invitations from parents grateful for her influence on their children. And Sundays, after church, belonged to Dan. True to his word, he maintained perfect propriety in public. Their outings were always in daylight, often included others for portions of the time, and never extended past early evening. Yet within those boundaries, a deepening connection grew between them. Dan showed her the breathtaking waterfall in Wilson's Canyon, where they picnicked on a sun-warmed rock while discussing their favorite books. He took her to a high meadow carpeted with late wildflowers, where they spotted a family of deer grazing peacefully. They rode to a neighboring town for a harvest festival, laughing together at the antics of participants in the pie-eating contest. Through these outings, Willa gradually shared more of her past her childhood in a modest Boston home. Her parents' deaths from influenza when she was 18, her marriage at 22 to Thomas Harper, arranged more as a business transaction than a love match. His family needed my small inheritance to cover debts, she explained as they walked along a stream one golden afternoon. And I needed the security of marriage. It seemed sensible at the time. Was he kind to you? Dan asked, the question gentle but direct. Willa considered carefully. Not unkind, distant perhaps, preoccupied with business matters. We were still learning each other when he fell ill. She paused. His mother, however, was a different matter. Nothing I did pleased her. The house wasn't clean enough, the meals not elegant enough, my conversation not witty enough. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. And most unforgivable of all, after 11 months of marriage, no grandchild, Dan's expression tightened, as if that was solely your responsibility. In her eyes it was, Willa said softly. After Thomas died, she made it clear I had failed in my primary duty as a wife. She called me barren, a disgrace to the family name. They had stopped walking. Dan turned to face her directly, his blue eyes fierce with unexpected emotion. That woman was cruel and wrong. A true marriage isn't about duty or family names or even children. It's about partnership, respect, caring for each other through good times and bad. His passion surprised her. You sound like you speak from experience. A shadow crossed his features. The opposite. My parents had what I just described, a true partnership. I've been looking for the same ever since. He shook his head slightly. Had one near miss 6 years back, Rebecca, daughter of a rancher over in Summit County. We courted for months, but when I proposed, she confessed she couldn't bear the isolation of ranch life, wanted to live in Denver or even back east. I'm sorry, Willa said sincerely. Dan shrugged. Taught me something important. No matter how strong the attraction, a life together requires shared values, compatible dreams. His gaze found hers again. What dreams brought you to Silvercliff, Willa? The question caught her off guard. What dreams indeed? She had fled Boston out of necessity, taking the first respectable position available. Yet in these past weeks, something had shifted. Silvercliff no longer felt like an escape, it felt like a beginning. Independence, she said after a moment. The chance to be valued for my mind and abilities, not just as someone's wife or daughter. The opportunity to make a difference in children's lives. She smiled slightly. And perhaps to find the sense of belonging I never quite felt in Boston. Worthy dreams, he replied with approval. And are you finding what you sought? Willa looked around at the golden aspens lining the stream, at the clear blue sky overhead, at the man standing before her with genuine interest in his eyes. I believe I am, she said softly. More than I expected. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility. For an instant, Willa thought Dan might kiss her. Instead, he offered his arm to continue their walk, respecting the boundaries she had set. That night, alone in her quarters, Willa found herself thinking of the contrast between Dan and her late husband. Thomas had been polished, educated, precise in speech and manner, and ultimately cold. Dan was direct, sometimes rough around the edges, occasionally unpolished and unfailingly warm. Thomas had treated her like a possession. Dan treated her like a person of value. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. She was falling in love with Daniel Dawson, and she had no idea what to do about it. October brought the first dusting of snow to the mountains, and a letter that shattered Willa's hard-won peace. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by the stagecoach driver to the schoolhouse just as classes were ending. The Boston postmark made her stomach clench. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax seal of the Harper family crest. Mrs. Harper, Samuel Tucker's voice interrupted her dread. We finished cleaning the blackboards. Can we go now? Willa tucked the letter into her pocket. Yes, thank you, Samuel. I'll see you all tomorrow. Once the children had departed, she sank into her chair and withdrew the letter again. The elegant handwriting belonged to her brother-in-law, Richard Harper. Dear Mrs. Harper, it began formally. Recent developments necessitate your immediate return to Boston. My mother's health has deteriorated significantly, and there are matters of inheritance and family property requiring your attention as Thomas's widow. A ticket for your return journey is enclosed, departing from Denver on November 15th. I have arranged for your replacement as teacher in Silvercliff. Kindly confirm your compliance by telegraph at your earliest convenience. Regards, Richard Harper. Enclosed was indeed a train ticket and a bank draft to cover stagecoach fare to Denver. The presumption of it all struck Willa like a physical blow. They had dismissed her as a disgrace, made her departure from Boston necessary, and now summoned her back as if she were a servant to be commanded, yet beneath her indignation lurked fear. What matters of inheritance could possibly require her presence? Thomas had left everything to his mother, a fact his family had made painfully clear after the funeral. Was this some new method of humiliation? Or worse, was there some legal obligation she had unknowingly failed to fulfill? That evening, Willa barely touched her dinner. The letter weighed on her mind, clouding her thoughts as she attempted to prepare the next day's lessons. By the time she finally extinguished her lamp and lay down, she had reached no conclusion about how to respond. Sleep eluded her. Near midnight, she rose and rekindled the lamp, rereading the letter for perhaps the 20th time. The commanding tone, the assumption of compliance, the complete disregard for the life she had built here, all of it rankled deeply. Yet she could not simply ignore it. Even here in Colorado territory, she remained legally bound as Thomas Harper's widow. If there were genuine legal matters requiring her attention, refusing could have consequences she couldn't predict. When dawn finally broke, Willa had made her decision. She would telegraph Richard Harper to request more specific information about these matters before committing to any journey. In the meantime, she would seek advice from someone with more knowledge of legal concerns. After school that day, she walked to Mayor Thompson's home, where he also maintained a small law practice. The mayor listened gravely to her explanation, examining the letter with a frown. Troubling, he said finally. Without more details, it's difficult to determine if this is a legitimate legal summons or merely family pressure. I'd be happy to draft a telegraph response for you, requesting clarification. Thank you, Willa said gratefully. I would appreciate that greatly. The mayor's wire was polite but firm, requesting specific details regarding the legal matters in question before Mrs. Harper could make travel arrangements. Willa approved it, paid for its transmission, and tried to put the matter from her mind until a response arrived. Sunday came, and with it her now customary outing with Dan. He noticed her distraction immediately as they rode toward a scenic overlook he had promised to show her. "Something's troubling you," he observed after several attempts at conversation fell flat. Would it help to talk about it? Willa hesitated. She had told Dan much about her past, but discussing the letter meant acknowledging the potential disruption to her new life to whatever might be growing between them. "I received a letter from Boston," she finally admitted. "From my brother-in-law, requesting demanding my return to address some unspecified matters of inheritance." Dan's expression sharpened with concern. "Do you believe there's legitimate business requiring your presence?" "I don't know. Mayor Thompson helped me send a telegraph requesting specifics." She sighed. "What troubles me is not just the uncertainty but the presumption. They included a ticket for November 15th, assuming I would simply abandon my position here on their command." They had reached the overlook, a rocky outcropping offering a spectacular view of the valley below. Dan helped her dismount, then secured both horses to a nearby tree before joining her at the edge. "What does your instinct tell you?" he asked after a moment of silence. "That this is some form of manipulation," she admitted. "My mother-in-law never approved of me. Perhaps in her illness she seeks one final opportunity to express her disapproval." Dan's jaw tightened. "Then don't go. It may not be that simple," Willa replied. "If there are genuine legal matters, those can be handled through correspondence or representatives," he countered. "You don't owe them your presence, especially after how they treated you." His vehemence surprised her. "You seem very certain." "I've seen what happens when good people allow themselves to be manipulated by those who claim authority over them." His voice had an edge she'd never heard before. "My father nearly lost this ranch to an unscrupulous banker who convinced him to sign papers he didn't fully understand. Only my mother's intervention saved our home." Willa absorbed this information, understanding better his strong reaction. "I promise I won't make any hasty decisions. I'm waiting for Richard's response to the telegraph." Dan nodded, visibly calming himself. "I'm sorry if I spoke too forcefully." "It's just—" He hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind about something. "Willa, these past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember in years. The thought of you returning to people who treated you cruelly—" "Dan," she began, but he gently placed a finger over her lips. "Let me finish. I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I've respected that, but I need you to know that what I feel for you goes beyond friendship or simple admiration." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I'm falling in love with you, Willa Harper. And whatever decision you make about Boston, I'll support you. But I want you to make that decision knowing there's someone here who sees your worth, who believes in your strength, who wants to build a future with you if you'll consider it." The declaration left her momentarily speechless. Though she had sensed the deepening of his feelings, had felt her own growing in response, hearing the words spoken aloud made them suddenly, breathtakingly real. "I don't expect an answer now," he continued gently. "Just wanted you to know where I stand before you decide anything about Boston." Willa found her voice at last. "Dan, I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible after everything that happened in Boston. But I need to resolve this situation before I can properly consider a future here with you or anyone." He nodded, accepting her answer without protest. "Fair enough. Just remember what I said before. You're brave, Willa. Braver than you know. Trust that strength, whatever you decide." They stood together at the overlook for a long while after that, not speaking, his hand eventually finding hers. The touch was simple, undemanding, yet profoundly comforting. 2 days later, Richard Harper's response arrived by telegraph. The message was brief but illuminating. "Mothers will includes conditional bequest to you, presence required for legal disposition. Failure to appear may result in forfeit of inheritance. Stop, replacement teacher already arranged." "Stop, expect your arrival as scheduled. Stop." Mayor Thompson frowned as he read it alongside Willa in his office. "Interesting. A conditional bequest suggests your mother-in-law has left you something in her will, but with strings attached. That seems unlike her, Willa murmured. She made it abundantly clear I deserved nothing from the Harper family. Perhaps her illness has softened her heart, the mayor suggested, though his tone indicated doubt. Or perhaps this is exactly as you suspected, a final opportunity to exercise control. And what of this replacement teacher they claim to have arranged? I've received no notification from the school board. Nor have I, as chairman, Mayor Thompson confirmed. It seems your brother-in-law is overstepping significantly, Willa's thoughts raced. If her mother-in-law truly intended to leave her something of value, could she afford to forfeit it by refusing to appear? Yet the arrangement of a replacement teacher without her knowledge suggested manipulation beyond simple legal necessity. What would you advise? She asked finally. The mayor considered carefully. From a legal perspective, if there is indeed an inheritance at stake, your presence might be prudent. However, you are under no obligation to remain in Boston afterward or to accept any conditions you find unreasonable. He paused. Would it be possible for you to go, address the legal matters swiftly, and return to Silvercliff? The possibility hadn't occurred to Willa. In her mind, a return to Boston had meant the end of her life in Colorado, but perhaps it needn't be so absolute. I would need assurance that my position here would remain open, she said slowly. And I would want to depart after the first term ends in December, not on their arbitrary November date. I can guarantee your position, Mayor Thompson said firmly. The school board has been extremely pleased with your work. As for timing, that seems entirely reasonable. Willa nodded, her mind clearer now. Then I shall wire my brother-in-law that I will come to Boston in late December, after fulfilling my teaching obligations for the term, and that I expect to return to Silvercliff afterward. An excellent response, the mayor approved. Direct but not confrontational. Shall I help you draft it? That evening, Willa sat alone in her quarters, contemplating her decision. The telegraph had been sent, asserting her terms for the journey. Now she faced another, more personal challenge, telling Dan she didn't have to wait long. A knock at her door just after supper revealed him standing on her small porch, his expression concerned. Mayor Thompson mentioned you received a response from Boston, he said without preamble. I wanted to check that you're all right. Willa invited him in, propriety momentarily set aside in favor of privacy for their conversation. She explained the telegraph's contents and her decision to travel to Boston after the term ended, but to return to Silvercliff afterward. Dan listened carefully, his relief visible when she emphasized her intention to return. That seems wise, he said finally. Address whatever legal matters exist, but on your terms, not theirs. Exactly my thinking, she agreed. Though I confess, the prospect of facing my mother-in-law and brother-in-law again is daunting. You're not the same woman who left Boston, Dan pointed out. You've built a life here, earned respect through your own merits. They have no power over you anymore unless you grant it to them. His confidence in her was both touching and fortifying. Thank you for that reminder. I wish I could accompany you, he said unexpectedly. Not that you need protection, but sometimes having an ally present changes how others behave. The image of Dan Dawson in the Harper family's formal Boston drawing room almost made Willa smile despite her anxiety. While I appreciate the thought, I think this is a journey I need to make alone, to prove to myself as much as to them that I am not the same person they dismissed as a disgrace. Dan nodded, understanding in his eyes. When will you depart? December 18th, after the school term ends. I've arranged for the stagecoach to Denver, then the train east. And you'll return? The question held more than simple curiosity. Willa met his gaze directly. Yes, Dan, I will return. My life is here now, my work, my students. She hesitated, then added softly, and you, if you're still interested when I come back. His smile transformed his face. I think you can count on that, Mrs. Harper. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Just don't let those Boston folks convince you that you belong back there. You're a Western woman now, whether you realize it or not. The weeks leading up to her departure passed quickly. The school term concluded successfully, with even Samuel Tucker showing remarkable improvement in both behavior and academics. The town held a small Christmas pageant where Willa's students demonstrated their new knowledge to proud parents. Dan remained a steady presence, never pressing for declarations beyond what she had already offered, but making it clear through small gestures that his feelings remained unchanged. A book of Western poetry appeared on her desk one morning. Fresh wildflowers, somehow found despite the season, arrived weekly. When snow made walking difficult, he insisted on driving her to and from school in his sleigh. The evening before her departure, he brought a small package to her quarters. "A little something for your journey," he explained as she unwrapped the soft leather gloves lined with rabbit fur. "Denver gets mighty cold this time of year and the train can be drafty." "They're beautiful," Willa said, genuinely touched by the practical yet personal gift. "Thank you." "There's something else," he added, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. From his pocket he withdrew a small wooden box. I'm not." He took a breath, collecting himself. "This is my mother's ring. I'd like you to take it with you to Boston." Willa opened the box to find a simple silver band inset with a small but perfect sapphire. "Dan, I couldn't possibly, I'm not proposing," he clarified quickly. "Not yet. That wouldn't be fair with you facing this journey and its uncertainties." His eyes held hers steadily. "But I want you to have something of mine with you in Boston, a reminder of what's waiting here when you're ready to return." The gesture was so perfectly Dan's straightforward, yet deeply meaningful, respecting her independence while making his intentions clear. "I'll keep it safe," she promised, closing the box carefully, "and I'll think of you whenever I look at it. That's all I ask," he smiled, though she could see the worry behind it. "Safe travels, Willa, right when you can." "I will," she promised. Then, making a decision that felt both impulsive and completely right, she stepped forward and kissed him briefly, softly. "That's a promise to continue our conversation when I return." His expression as she stepped back was worth any impropriety the gesture might have represented. The journey to Boston was long and grueling, despite the comfort of modern rail travel for most of the distance. Willa had forgotten the oppressive crowds of eastern cities, the soot-filled air, the constant noise. By the time she arrived at the Harper family home in Beacon Hill, she felt grimy, exhausted, and increasingly certain she had made a mistake in coming. The house was exactly as she remembered: imposing, immaculately maintained, coldly perfect. A servant she didn't recognize admitted her, taking her modest traveling bag with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Harper is expecting you in the drawing room," the maid informed her, leading the way through the familiar hallway. Willa steeled herself before entering. The woman who had once made her life miserable now lay propped on a chaise lounge, wrapped in blankets despite the roaring fire. Edith Harper had always been slim, but illness had reduced her to a skeletal figure, her once immaculate appearance now marked by sunken cheeks and dull eyes. "So you've finally arrived," she said by way of greeting, her voice weaker but no less imperious than Willa remembered. "Took your time about it, I see." "I completed my teaching obligations before departing, as I explained in my telegraph," Willa replied evenly. "I trust you've been comfortable during my absence." Richard Harper entered before his mother could respond. "Ah, Willa, good you're here." He had aged in the year since she'd last seen him, gray threading his dark hair. "We have matters to discuss." "So I've been informed," Willa said, remaining standing though neither had invited her to sit. "Perhaps you could explain these matters of inheritance that required my presence so urgently." Richard glanced at his mother, who nodded slightly. "Mother has indeed included you in her will," he began. "The Harper cottage in Cape Cod and a modest annual allowance." Willa blinked in surprise. The cottage was a valuable property, and any allowance from the Harper fortune would be substantial by her current standards. "However," Edith interjected, "there are conditions." "I expected as much," Willa replied. "What are they?" "You will return to Boston permanently," Richard stated. "Resume your place in society as Thomas's widow. And eventually, when an appropriate period has passed, you will marry Charles Whitley." The name struck Willa like a blow. Charles Whitley was a business associate of the Harpers, a widower in his 50s who had always regarded her with an interest that bordered on inappropriate. "You cannot be serious," she managed, her shock evident. "Entirely serious," Edith replied. "Charles needs a wife to manage his household and raise his children. You need financial security and a respectable position. The arrangement is sensible for all concerned. And if I refuse?" Richard's expression hardened. "Then you receive nothing. The cottage goes to my daughter and the allowance is directed to charitable causes." Willa fought to maintain her composure. The sheer audacity of their demand to dictate not only her residence but her future marriage was breathtaking in its presumption. "I see," she said finally. "And when must I make this decision?" "Now," Edith said flatly. "The lawyer arrives tomorrow to finalize the will. Either you agree to the conditions or your name is removed entirely." Willa's mind raced. She had come prepared for manipulation, but not for this specific demand. Yet even as indignation rose within her, a strange calm followed. The answer was suddenly crystal clear. "No," she said simply. "What did you say?" Edith's voice sharpened. "I said no. I will not return to Boston permanently. I will not marry Charles Whitley, and I will not accept an inheritance with such unconscionable conditions attached." Richard stepped forward, his expression darkening. "You're being foolish, Willa. What exactly do you think awaits you in that frontier backwater? Teaching grubby children for a pittance, living alone in a crude cabin. You're a Harper by marriage. It's time you remembered what that means." Willa straightened her spine, thinking suddenly of Dan's words. "You're brave." "I am Willa Harper by marriage, yes, but I am Willa by choice and character. In Silvercliff, I have meaningful work, the respect of the community, and—" She paused, considering how much to reveal, "and the possibility of a future based on mutual respect and affection, not financial convenience." Edith struggled to sit more upright. "A man, you found some uncouth frontiersman to take you in. How utterly predictable." The contempt in her tone might once have crushed Willa. Now it merely strengthened her resolve. "Daniel Dawson is a successful rancher, a respected member of the community, and a man of integrity. Most importantly, he values me for who I am, not for what I represent or what I can provide. You would choose this cowboy over the security and position we offer." Richard demanded, incredulous. "Without hesitation," Willa replied, surprised by her own certainty. "Now, if there are no actual legal matters requiring my attention, I believe this conversation is concluded." She turned to leave, but Edith's voice stopped her at the doorway. "You're making a terrible mistake, Willa. When that wild country breaks your spirit, and it will, don't expect to find our door open to you again." Willa looked back one last time at the woman who had caused her so much pain. "Mrs. Harper, I forgive you for your cruelty during my marriage and after Thomas's death. I hope you find peace in whatever time remains to you." She nodded to Richard. "Good day to you both." As she closed the drawing room door behind her, Willa felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since arriving in Boston, she took a full, deep breath. Their attempt at manipulation had failed. More importantly, it had clarified her own heart and mind with unexpected clarity. She belonged in Silvercliff. With her students, her small but comfortable home, the community that valued her contributions. With Dan, if he would still have her, the journey back to Colorado seemed faster, lighter, despite winter conditions that occasionally delayed the trains. Willa spent the hours planning her return to teaching, composing a letter to Dan in her mind, imagining the expressions on her students' faces when she reappeared. The stagecoach from Denver to Silvercliff fought through snow-covered mountain passes, arriving 2 days later than scheduled. By the time they pulled into town, Willa was exhausted but filled with anticipation. Home. She was finally home. As the stagecoach drew to a halt, she was surprised to see a crowd gathered despite the cold January afternoon. Mayor Thompson stood at the forefront, alongside several school board members and parents of her students. "Mrs. Harper," he called as she descended with the driver's assistance. "Welcome back. We were beginning to worry when the stage was delayed." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely touched by the welcome. The mountain passes were difficult after the recent snowfall. "We're just glad you've returned safely," he assured her, though perhaps not as glad as some. He gestured behind him with a knowing smile. Dan emerged from the crowd, his tall figure unmistakable, his expression a mixture of relief and barely contained emotion. He approached slowly, as if uncertain of his welcome after their weeks apart. "Willa," he said simply, "you came back." "Of course I did," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I told you I would." Around them, the crowd began to disperse, giving them a semblance of privacy despite being in the middle of the street. "How was Boston?" he asked, taking her valise from her hand. "Illuminating," she answered. "My in-laws did indeed have an inheritance to offer, but with conditions I could never accept." His expression darkened. "What kind of conditions?" "Permanent return to Boston, eventually marrying a man of their choosing." She shook her head. "They thought I would be desperate enough to agree. And you weren't," he observed, pride evident in his voice. "No, because I realized something important while I was there." She reached into her pocket, withdrawing the small wooden box he had given her. "I realized where I belong." "And with whom, if he's still interested?" Dan's eyes widened as she opened the box, revealing his mother's ring. "Willa, you were right about me being brave," she continued softly, "but my courage comes easier when I know I'm not facing the world alone." She held the box toward him. "In Boston, they called me a disgrace for choosing my own path. You called me brave and asked nothing in return. I'd like to give you something anyway, my heart, if you'll have it." For a moment, Dan seemed speechless, an unusual state for the normally articulate rancher. Then, heedless of the few remaining onlookers, he pulled her into his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "This isn't just reaction to what happened in Boston." Willa shook her head. "Boston merely confirmed what I already knew but was afraid to admit." "I love you, Daniel Dawson. I have for some time now." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "In that case, Mrs. Harper," he said, taking the ring from its box, "would you do me the honor of becoming Mrs. Dawson instead?" "Not immediately. I know you'll want a proper courtship, but eventually." "Yes," she replied without hesitation, "though I don't need a lengthy courtship to know my own mind." He slipped the ring onto her finger where the sapphire caught the winter sunlight. "Your students will be beside themselves with excitement," he murmured. "Samuel Tucker already asked me 3 times if I thought you'd really come back." "Speaking of my students," Willa said, suddenly remembering, "school should resume next week." "I need to prepare the classroom, organize lessons." Dan laughed, the sound warming her more effectively than any fire could have. "Always the dedicated teacher. Don't worry, the children helped me ready the schoolhouse yesterday, just in case you returned in time. They're quite determined to impress you with how well they maintained their learning during your absence." The thought of her students and Dan working together to prepare for her return filled Willa with a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "Take me home, Dan," she said softly. "I've had quite enough of traveling for now." "Which home?" he asked. "Your quarters at the school or—" He hesitated. "You could come to Clearwater. Not to stay yet, that wouldn't be proper until after the wedding, but for dinner. Mrs. Abernathy has been cooking since word came that the stagecoach was sighted. Dinner at Clearwater sounds perfect," Willa decided. "And afterward, you can tell me everything I missed while I was away." As they walked toward his waiting buggy, snow began to fall gently around them, large, perfect flakes that caught in Willa's hair and on Dan's broad shoulders. He helped her up, then paused before climbing in himself. "I almost forgot," he said, reaching into his coat. "This came for you yesterday." He handed her an envelope bearing a Boston postmark. Willa recognized Richard's handwriting immediately. For a moment, she considered tossing it aside unopened. Then, curiosity won out. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Mother passed 2 days after your departure," it read in Richard's precise script. "Her final act was to change her will. The Cape Cod cottage is yours, no conditions attached. She said you showed more backbone than she expected. Coming from her, that was high praise. Do with the property what you will sell it, keep it, burn it to the ground. It's yours now, free and clear. Richard." Willa read the note twice, then handed it to Dan. It seems my mother-in-law had one final surprise. He scanned the contents, his eyebrows rising. A valuable property with no strings attached. That's unexpected. Indeed. Willa considered the implications. We could sell it. The proceeds would help expand the school, perhaps add a proper library for the children. Dan's expression softened as he climbed into the buggy beside her. He repeated. I like the sound of that. So do I, Willa replied, settling against him as he wrapped a thick blanket around them both. We belong in Silvercliff, helping build something meaningful. The cottage can serve that purpose from afar. As the buggy pulled away from town toward Clearwater Ranch, Willa watched the familiar landscape transformed by winter, the silver-dusted pines, the mountains etched against the darkening sky. So different from Boston's ordered streets and uniform buildings. So much more alive. What are you thinking? Dan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. That my in-laws did me a favor in the end, she replied. If they hadn't called me a disgrace, I might never have found the courage to leave, might never have discovered what real respect and affection feel like. She turned to face him, might never have found you. Then I owe them a debt of gratitude, he said, his smile warming her despite the cold air, though I still think they were fools not to value you properly. Their loss, Willa murmured, leaning into his strength, our gain. The buggy crested a hill, revealing Clearwater Ranch spread below them, windows glowing with welcoming light against the gathering dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney in a straight column, promising warmth and comfort within. Home, Willa thought, not the building itself, but what it represented. Acceptance, purpose, love freely given and returned. As Dan guided the horses down the slope toward the ranch, Willa knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Boston and its rigid society lay behind her. Ahead stretched a future bright with possibility, teaching children who truly wanted to learn, building a life with a man who saw her strength and valued her mind, becoming part of a community where she was respected for her contributions. Her in-laws had called her a disgrace for choosing her own path. Dan had called her brave and asked nothing in return. In the end, she had given him her heart anyway, freely and completely, and in doing so had finally found where she truly belonged.